four. Is it four still?
Four. Yeah, just
yep. Four. Some of his work through his book collection. Give us a quickie review of four of his favourite books on the Jesus mythicist and historical issues.
Yeah, my name is Lee McGiffen. I'm not an atheist. I'm an atheist, or theological non-cognitive. Thank you. I don't believe in God because the word God is not defined. It's not. There's no coherent definition of God. And what I say to people who say there is a God, I say you come up with a coherent definition of God, and then we'll talk. So that's my position. Good response. You know, I thought of calling my talk "The Quest for the Mythical Jesus." There was a talk last year by David Killingly, who. Thank you, David. I was wondering if you two were related. Your father and son, are you? Okay. And of course, you gave a talk on the quest for the historical Jesus. I'd like to sort of switch that around. And I remember at that talk, you conducted a quick a survey of the audience, and I think about half the people, half the atheists there, thought that there was a historical Jesus, and the other half thought that there wasn't. So that was the impression that I got. I fall into the category of there was no historical Jesus. I'd just like to elaborate a little bit more about the types of Jesus that people think about, and we'll have to use our imaginations here. Sorry, I don't have a computer presentation, but
no, that's good.
I think it's good that we use our imaginations. After all, the Christians do, so why not us? At the top we have the literal Jesus, and the bottom we have no historical Jesus. The literal Jesus is, of course, as we know, the Jesus who died under Pontius Pilate, was resurrected during his life, had all these performed all these miracles. But in between these two, the literal Jesus and the fictional Jesus, there's like a grey area which a lot of people still subscribe to, the wise sage Jesus. Jesus didn't perform miracles, but he did exist. He did wander around Palestine, teaching great things like the Sermon on the Mount and the Lord's Prayer and so on. As a mythicist, I see it as my obligation to say, okay, where did the stories come from, and what are we? Where did the gospel writer or writers get their ideas? The first one I probably might start with this. This is Jesus Never Existed. This is the book of the website by Ken Humphreys. It's a very large website, as reflected in this book, and like the website, the book is all over the place. You can sort of, like with a website, you can start anywhere and sort of follow the links. This is pretty much the same. You can open it anywhere. You get a great read. He treats the basic arguments really well. You've got your typical arguments. Jesus was mentioned in Josephus. This puts paid to that. The Testimonium Flavianum, as it's called, was forged by Eusebius in the 3rd century. There are other writers, Justus of Tiberias, Philo Judaeus, who lived in the 1st century, but who never mentioned Jesus, and they would have mentioned Jesus had Jesus existed. So this is a strong argument for lack of evidence for there probably not being a Jesus. So the title of the book, as you know, when we call ourselves atheists, we say sometimes God didn't exist, or should we say God probably doesn't exist, as the British bus campaign had it. Same with this book. Should we say Jesus never existed, or Jesus probably never existed? You can get into an argument over that. to go on to this one next. This is Dennis MacDonald, The Homeric Epics and the Gospel of Mark. Now, I was quite surprised to read in parts that he seems to assume that Jesus was an historical character, and yet he says that the Gospel of Mark, which people who study the synoptic problem, which is basically comes from a study of a comparison of the Gospels, the three synoptic Gospels being Matthew, Mark and Luke, they will tell you that the Gospel of Mark was written first, and that seems to be the general consensus, and then Matthew and Luke, not their real names, but we'll call them that anyway.
Who is the author?
Who is the author of the Gospels? Of this book? Dennis MacDonald. His basic thesis is that the Gospel of Mark was written by someone who's trying to write a fiction like the Homeric epics, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. And there are various things taken from the Iliad and the Odyssey, such as Odysseus was a builder. He built his own palace, and he is described in the Iliad as a tekton, which is what Jesus was described as, which really means a builder, not a carpenter. Odysseus had followers who were cowards, who betrayed him, just like the disciples of Jesus. He basically got his idea from studying the Gnostic Gospel of Andrew, who died in the same manner as Odysseus, being strung to his mast and virtually crucified on the seashore. And MacDonald got the idea, gee, that seems like a fictional story which the Gospel writer took from the Iliad and made a whole elaborate scenario. A religious epic, nonetheless, that is basically a fiction with a whole lot of elements taken from the Homeric epics, which were basically well known in the first century. You know, this is something that is not really talked about in the Christian skeptic books, or the Jesus skeptic books, and that is when were the Gospels written? And a lot of people talk about, there were Christians in the first century. The Gospels were written in the first century. The Gospel of Mark was the earliest was written was probably around 70 CE or AD for other people. At the beginning, or just before the Jewish War, and this brings us to this. And this is probably the most important book that I've come across on possible, maybe probable origins of the Gospel stories. This is by a guy called Joseph Atwill, who used to run a forum on the internet called the Caesar's Messiah Forum. This book is called Caesar's Messiah, and it's a bit of a pun. Caesar apostrophe S. So I take it to mean Caesar is Messiah. I think that's what he's saying. In the Jewish War, some of you may know, some of you may not, Vespasian, in the year 69, was commissioned by the Emperor Nero to wage a war against the Jewish people, and he meets Josephus, possibly on the road to Damascus, which is the origin of the story of Paul seeing the light, or meeting the resurrected Jesus on the road to Damascus. The idea being that the story of Paul on the road to Damascus is derived from Josephus meeting Vespasian on the road to Damascus. Josephus was at one time governor of Galilee, and would have been familiar with Jesus of Galilee. Which brings me to another book which I might mention, The Three Messiahs by Daniel Unterbrink, which is basically about a crucified Messiah called Judas of Galilee. Possibly the root of the story of Judas Iscariot. Judas of Galilee was born maybe about 30 BCE, 25 BCE. He was involved with another guy called Matthias, and he and Matthias went to the Temple of Jerusalem, which had a large eagle, a Roman eagle, had been installed in the temple, and they purged the temple and got chucked in prison. We don't know the full details of what happened, but it looks like Matthias died in prison, and Judas of Galilee was released in a prisoner exchange thing, which may have become the basis of the Barabbas Jesus exchange, prisoner exchange under Pontius Pilate. And as far as Pontius Pilate is concerned, there is no record of any trial or crucifixion under Pilate. Philo Judaeus wrote quite a number of books about the history of Judaism in the first century. He was very highly connected, and if he knew about a Jesus, he would have written about him, but there's nothing. He did write a book on Pilate, but that book has gone missing, and the Christians preserved every book of Philo Judaeus except the book on Pilate, and we have to wonder why that was. Did it not mention what they wanted it to say? Judas of Galilee was the founder of the Zealot movement. In 6 CE, there was, as we know, the census of Quirinius, and Judas led a tax revolt and gathered around a lot of zealots. He was founder of the Zealot movement. There's no record in Josephus of the death of Judas of Galilee, which was strange because all the other zealot leaders who were killed or crucified were recorded in Josephus, but and Josephus mentions Judas, but he doesn't record his death. That's very strange. And Dan Unterbrink comes up with an interesting idea that the Testimonium Flavianum in Josephus was actually written about Judas of Galilee. In my opinion, that's a little bit strange, but at least it does sort of try to attempt to account for the missing death of Judas of Galilee. I might talk now a little bit more about this subtitle, Caesar's Messiah, the Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus. Joe Atwell's thesis is that, as far as I can gather, after the death of Titus, Vespasian goes into Judea to begin to wipe out the Jews, and as soon as he gets into Judea and meets Josephus, he's recalled to Rome because Nero has died, and Vespasian, who's a general and is a very high office, has to go back to sort things out. And he doesn't become emperor straight away. There's a few emperors that take over, and one of them is extremely cruel, Vitellius. Anyway, Vespasian is involved in the assassination of Vitellius, and Vespasian eventually becomes emperor of Rome. While Vitellius is emperor of Rome, Titus, Vespasian's son, takes over the role of purging the Jews, or getting rid of the Zealot movement, which basically started by Judas of Galilee. So we get these two books. I'd like to see someone write a book that actually combines this whole idea of the rising and the crushing of the Zealot movement, make it an all-encompassing.
There is one.
Apocalypse, is it? And who's it? Who's that one?
An English guy
Oh, yeah, it's good. There are so many books. I've been trying to, I'm interested in like fringe books. These are fringe books. There are more conventional books that look at the possibility that Jesus was based on, say, Apollonius of Tyana, who was a wise sage who went around teaching Buddhist ethics in the 1st century. Apollonius of Tyana was a close associate and confidant of the Emperor Vespasian and the Emperor Titus. Now, Titus, as Vespasian's son, as he moved through Palestine, killing Jews, a lot of his exploits, according to Joe Atwill, were actually transformed into miracle stories. And so we get the story of Titus ordering his men to throw darts at Jews fleeing into the Sea of Galilee. I can't remember exactly, but this ended up as Jesus saying to his disciples, "I will make you fishers of men." And in other words, the men were being treated. The Romans were the analogy being that the Romans were spearing these fleeing Jews like fish and killing them. There's other parallels that Joe Atwell makes between the campaign of Titus and Jesus. Titus had a triumphant entry into Jerusalem and sacked the Jerusalem temple, and according to Atwill, this triumphant entry of Titus got transformed in the Gospels into the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. There's other interesting things that parallels between what the Gospels write about Jesus and what Josephus writes about the Jewish war that are worth looking at. For example, there was a fellow called Jesus. What was his name? There's quite a few Jesuses that Josephus mentions. There was a guy who used to wander around Jerusalem. This was during the Jewish war. He used to wander around Jerusalem saying, "Woe, woe to Jerusalem, you are about to fall," which was pretty obvious. And he got killed by a stone from a Roman siege engine. And the idea, according to Joe Atwill, is this episode actually ended up in the Gospel of Mark chapter 13, I believe it was, as there's something about falling stones that's mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. Well, I should have looked it up. Any Bible scholars here remember Jesus talking about stones falling on people?
The millstone.
Not the millstone.
It's walking under a bridge that might fall on them.
No, not that.
Mark,
No,
It's the tower.
I'd like to follow this up at a future forum if I may.
Yes.
I'd like to do my research a bit more thoroughly. I'm dealing with a lot of disparate ideas, but
Did you want to let them have a couple of questions now?
I just want to say there were various when Titus finished his campaign. He went back to Rome. Vespasian was emperor, and when Vespasian died, Titus became emperor. This is around the year 80 to 82. Only 3 years Titus was emperor. And after Titus died, in fact after Vespasian died, which was the year 80, there was a campaign by the followers of Vespasian and Titus, the Flavians. This was the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian was the founder of the Flavian dynasty. There was a campaign to deify Vespasian and Titus, and we don't have any documents of the actual document that was submitted to the Senate for the deification of them, but Joe Atwill argues that this this deification ended up with the, as like a proto gospel of Mark, where you had Titus being deified as the saviour of the Jews, and in fact there was around the 1st century there was a prophecy which has been noted by various Christian authors and Roman authors. Josephus mentions it, that there would be a saviour come from the east who would be somehow would come out of Israel, or come out of
Jacob, wasn't it?
No. That you're thinking of the is it the Zephaniah
Numbers.
prophecy. There's also a Micah prophecy. There's a few prophecies from the Hebrew Bible, but there was actually this was actually a prophecy that came from the Sibian Oracle, and the ancient pagan world did incorporate a lot of the Jewish prophecies as well, and there was like a mishmash of religion going on. There was a syncretism going on of Jewish and Greco-Roman ideas, and this is what the Gospels do show. They show a fusion of Jewish prophecy and Roman prophecy, and quite a few characters like Apollonius of Tyana, Titus, Judas of Galilee, this other Jesus character, probably about a dozen characters who seem to have been melded into this one Jesus Christ character of the Gospels. So it looks like I'm getting the details here. We've got a break.
We've got another break.
Got time for,
It was Mark 13, by the way.
questions. I know I've covered
Yes.
a lot of ground, but
there's one question. Is it?
Yes, I was just wondering, why do you think pretty much all historians, that is, historians who publish in peer-reviewed journals, reject the Jesus myth hypothesis? The only one who, the possible exception, is Professor G.A. Wells. He's from London University. He's a professor of German language. He's not a historian. Why hasn't this taken a foothold in mainstream historical scholarship?
Can I answer?
Yes, we'll be happy.
That is because most of the academics have a vested interest to say there was an actual Jesus, even though the actual Jesus that all of them are talking about had nothing to do with the Jesus of the Bible. It's really frowned upon to actually come out and say it was all made up and it never existed. And people like Bart Ehrman actually bully people who come out and say that that it was all myth, and say you'll never work again in the industry. You'll never be
Are you sure
part
about
of a
that? I mean,
university.
that sounds awfully like a conspiracy.
It does.
I
You're
would
welcome to look into
I'd have to
it.
agree with this gentleman. Yeah. But there is one scholar
no
who
one,
does.
scholars, when they retire, come out and say that they're mythicists. There's a really prominent Jewish scholar that's come out as a mythicist recently.
It's a slew of a lot of scholars.
Yeah,
That's all you gotta get.
the only credible scholar you'll find that is promoting the mythicist theory is
Robert Price.
Robert Price and
Richard Carey has also come
Richard
out with
Carrier,
Yeah,
who's not affiliated with the university. He's got nothing to do.
Yeah, he doesn't publish in peer-reviewed journals, as far as I know. He does write popular books.
This is
It's a big question, but it just strikes me that all you ever hear is about this overwhelming majority of scholars. You never hear the reason.
Most
You never
of
hear
them
what
are
the killer fact
Christians.
is that makes this so true.
Yeah.
Oh,
Look
you
up
do.
the review of Bart Ehrman on Doherty's book, The Jesus Puzzle, and you'll find he's less than scholarly. In fact, the article is laughable. For anyone who knows anything about the scholarship, his article is full of logical fallacies and ad hominem
Barties?
attacks. It's really
Yeah,
Yeah,
Bart Ehrman
poorly
has written a few books. I've looked at this controversy. This is only a few months old, this controversy. Bart Ehrman has written a new book where his original books seem to have indicated that he was skeptical of a historical Jesus, and now this new book indicates Bart Ehrman is now an apologist for the Christian tradition. And in fact, one of the criticisms of Bart Ehrman's original books was that Bart Ehrman said we should still be open to the idea of a Jesus who performed miracles. And a lot of atheists, when they heard that, said, forget it, Bart Ehrman, you're out of here. And now that he's come out with this new book, he's just laid his cards on the table that he's just straight down the line Christian apologist.
Okay, yep, now this is a big one, we're not going to fix it. So we're going to have a break, okay, and we're going to have some of the hot food.